If you've been building sites with WordPress for a while, Astro can feel confusing in a very specific way. It doesn't look like WordPress, it doesn't talk like WordPress, and it certainly doesn't position itself like WordPress. So the first question isn't whether Astro is good or bad. The real question is, what kind of thing is Astro actually? And that is what this episode is about. Before we go any further, I want to be clear about what this episode is not going to do. This is not a tutorial. We're not installing anything. We're not writing code. And we're not deciding whether you should use Astro. The goal here is much simpler and much more important. By the end of this episode, you should understand what job Astro is designed to do, so you can evaluate it later without confusion or pressure. For people who primarily use WordPress, a lot of confusion around Astro comes from trying to map it directly onto the WordPress mental model. That's understandable. WordPress is often the entire system we're used to working in. In WordPress, content lives in the database. Layouts live in themes. Blocks live somewhere in between. Rendering happens at runtime. Design, editing, and publishing happen inside the same environment. All of that is bundled together into one monolithic CMS. And WordPress is very good at that job. But Astro is not trying to be that kind of system. So if you approach Astro asking, where's the admin, or how do I add posts, or what plugin does this replace, you're asking the wrong questions. A minute ago, I said that WordPress is a monolithic CMS. And that's not an insult, it's a description. What that means is that it stores content. It manages users and roles. It provides an editorial interface. It renders pages, and serves those pages dynamically. Content and display are tightly coupled. When you edit content in WordPress, you're editing the live system that visitors interact with. And that coupling is often a feature. You get things like instant updates, familiar workflows, powerful runtime querying. But it also means more moving parts at runtime. Layout and content logic spread across the database, the file system, and the editor. This leads to long-term complexity that tends to grow quietly over time. The WordPress monolithic model actually works extremely well, until it doesn't. You see, Astro is not a CMS by default. It doesn't ship with an admin interface, user roles, editorial workflows, plugins, or a database-backed content model. Astro's job is much narrower. Astro is responsible for assembling pages. That's all. It takes layouts, components, and content from various sources, and it produces finished HTML and static assets. Once that output exists, Astro steps out of the way. So when you hear phrases like front-end architecture or composition layer, what they actually mean is that Astro decides how pages are put together, not how content is edited, stored, or managed. By default, Astro is file-based. Content lives in files, layouts live in files, and the site structure lives in files. That has real implications. Some of the benefits are that everything is visible. Content can be version controlled. There are very few hidden runtime behaviors. There's a clear separation of concerns, and Astro is easily portable. There are also some real drawbacks. Things like no built-in interface for content editors. Content changes require a build and a deploy step. And collaboration requires processes, not just logins. This is not better or worse. It's a trade-off. And it's a trade-off that makes sense for some projects and absolutely not for others. But we'll talk about that later. For now, the important thing to understand is that file-based versus database-based is a design choice, not a moral one. Let's look at a few Astro sites. You'll notice that they don't look exotic. Astro is used to produce marketing sites, blogs, documentation, and content-heavy informational sites. The output often looks very similar to what WordPress agencies already build every day. The difference isn't what the visitor sees. The difference is how the site is assembled before the visitor ever arrives. I want to change to a semi-technical topic for just a minute as we wind down this video. If you've been around long enough, you might be thinking, isn't this just another front-end abstraction cycle? And that concern is reasonable. But Astro is deliberately not trying to turn your site into an application or a centralized state or push everything into JavaScript. Its defaults are intentionally boring, and I like boring. Astro is HTML first. CSS is CSS, and if you want to throw Sass or Tailwind in the mix, you're welcome to do that. And Astro adds JavaScript only where it's actually needed. Astro is opinionated, but in a direction of restraint. At this point, I've done way too much talking, and you might be asking, okay, but what does working on this actually feel like? And that's the right question. And it's also where a lot of explanations fall apart. So instead of trying to answer that abstractly, we're going to table that for the next video. In the next episode, we're not going to evaluate Astro, we're not going to argue for it, and we're still not doing a tutorial. Instead, I'm going to show you what working on Astro actually looks like, end to end. From source files, to build, to deployed output, to changing content and seeing it live. The goal is to remove the black box so that when we do talk about fit later, we're all looking at the same thing. If there's one takeaway from this episode, it's this. You don't need to decide whether Astro is a good idea yet. You just need to understand what job it's trying to do. Once that's clear, the rest of the conversation gets much easier. All right. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next episode. Way too much talking. And you might be asking, okay, but where blah 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 blah.